Have you ever sat in a pew on a Sunday and felt a deep and maybe even painful disconnect between the God you were reading about and experiencing in real life and the one that was being preached and proclaimed from the pulpit? Have you ever had this gnawing feeling that maybe you actually had something to say, that God was inviting you to be a leader, maybe even a pastor in your own faith community? In today's episode, we are going to discuss one person's journey to pursue their vocation, to practice ministry as a progressive Christian in a red state, in Missouri of all places. We are interviewing Ben Strnger, a civil rights lawyer who felt God was calling him to become a pastor. And so, at least for a moment, he paused his work at his law firm and decided to pursue a Master of Divinity degree. So some of what we want to do today is problematize what we mean when we're talking about ministry. Like, what does it mean for us to think about the call of ministry as such? Thanks a lot for listening, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christian Podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the detained and deport college students just trying to go home for Thanksgiving kind of Christians. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter and I am your host, and I'm delighted to be joined by Reverend Blair.
Hello all. Glad to be with you. Happy post-Thanksgiving into this season of really, we should all just have the whole month of December off of work until after Christmas, but we trudge forward in the capitalist scape. We are surviving.
We are trudging forward. That is exactly what we're doing. At least that's how I feel after eating too much on Thanksgiving. You know, I tell myself I'm not going to do it every year, and every year I succumb to the temptation. But we are not talking about overeating on this episode today. Today we are going to be discussing justice-oriented ministry and just basically how you do justice-oriented ministry in conservative and purple political communities. And we are having this conversation with a special guest, Ben Strnger. I'm going to read Ben's bio and let him introduce himself. Ben is a graduate of Missouri State University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy. He attended law school at the Arizona James E. Rogers College of Law, receiving his JD in 1998. He is admitted to practice law through the Missouri State Courts and numerous other federal courts. He has gained local, statewide, and national attention for civil rights and employment rights work. Most recently, he successfully challenged the passage of HB 1606, which is a law passed by the Missouri legislature that, among other things, sought to change the state's methodology for supporting organizations working with the unsheltered and to increase criminal penalties for individuals experiencing homelessness. The Missouri Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling in favor of Ben's client, striking down the law as unconstitutional. Ben has been selected as the Thompson. I think that's dope, man. I can't wait to talk about that. Ben has been selected as the Thompson Reuters super lawyer for over 15 years. He is also a graduate of Duke University, which is, I mean, hey, you got to go somewhere. Why not go to Duke, I guess, where he graduated summa cum laude in May of 2025 with a Master of Divinity. And he is currently serving lay pulpit supply in the United Methodist Church and other churches in Southern Missouri. Ben, it is great to have you on today's episode. Thanks for joining us.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me. That was a mouthful. It's good to be here.
It was a mouthful. I mean, with the exception of Duke, I think you got, I personally am like not a huge fan of Duke, but that's like some things I can say on the podcast, some things I can't.
Theologically, there's no issue here. I'm guessing this is a basketball issue. Is that correct, Dr. Carter?
It's a little bit, it's definitely a basketball issue. Like I'm from Michigan, so we are not fans of Duke for lots of reasons because of what they did to us in the 90s. But for the listeners, we've been talking about how are we going to expand the podcast in terms of more opportunities to interact with you all. And in order to really do that, like the podcast is basically I've become like my fourth job. And I just couldn't do it on my own. And Spencer talked to me about it. And honestly, it's like one of the, I don't typically hire people like this where someone's like, hey man, I could work for you. And I'm like, cool, let's do it. And it's turned out to be phenomenal. And as Spencer was telling us about his father, I was just like, man, this dude sounds he sounds dope. Like he's doing some good stuff. So let's have Mod and talk about it. So yes, that is the genesis of this. Blair, is there anything else you want to add?
Just that one of the cool things in this podcast too is that we're all parents, which isn't always the case for the cast. So kudos to us for raising children, which is an act of resistance in our contemporary moment. Well done, everyone.
What? Yeah, finger snaps.
So
All right,
Ben,
yeah.
tell us about yourself. Like, how did you end up being a civil rights attorney who went to seminary? How does this play out?
Yeah, you can start the civil
Yeah.
rights attorney. Like, what led you to say, hey, I want to actually practice civil rights law?
It's a great question. And I think probably some of the genesis of it is that I was raised in the middle of the country and probably thought differently than a lot of the folks that I was growing up around, or just saw the world differently. And at times was encouraged mostly by my mother to think about that. I was a kid who had, I was kind of split. I was an athlete, but I grew up in the theater, and I got a theater scholarship. I got an athletic scholarship, and that's really the only reason I went to college. I wasn't that interested in school. I just thought it was very uninteresting. I was bored in school until I got to college. And then after basically flunking out my first year and losing all of my scholarships, this was a time when you could work for a summer and earn tuition money. If you made a mistake, or if you were willing, you could work. Now I worked dusk to dawn, but I made tuition money for like the next semester, and I still needed a little bit of help, but like you could do that. And I went back to school and I stumbled into a philosophy class. I think I just used the term, like, it was my come to Jesus moment with academics, because the whole world started to make sense. School started to make sense. Thought started to make sense. Like what all of this is doing, how it fits. And I was good at it. I left the theater, and I kind of went into politics as a young person, which meshed well with both the theater and philosophy. And I was really passionate about, I think, just rights related work, in all these different ways, whether it was, social work, whether it was politics, whether it was law. And I think the law was probably the next best like transition for someone who came from this background of, like, to be honest, like theatrics and drama and philosophy. And so I liked it, and I did, well enough there. And so I started practicing, and I wanted to be a public interest lawyer, but I also had a huge family back here in the Midwest. And this has always been my tension, growing up here and having deep, deep roots here. There's something about home. And so being gone for 3 years in the Southwest was beautiful, just incredible. I'm a mixed kid. So my grandmother is from Panama. I'd never been in a community that was brown, or black, really, except for, brief time in Kansas City as a young kid. I didn't know that experience. I wanted that experience. And as much as I loved it, like, it still wasn't home for me. And so I returned home, and I found work here with a good group of trial lawyers. But I started this civil rights work probably because I had a group of people around me who trusted me more than they should as a young lawyer, and gave me some chances. And those chances turned out profitable, to be honest, for them. But it allowed me to continue in the work. And then as I had more success, I was able to grow this. And again, as Blair's already mentioned, it's a capitalist society. Even the law, works through money. It's the grease that, like, I don't know, makes everything work here. And so as I, grew my practice, I just had more and more opportunity. And yeah, so I'm grateful for that. And then I got to the point where seminary entered the picture.
Well, before we get into seminary, I think I guess talk a little bit about, like, did you grow up as like going to church? Like, what role did religion or Christianity play in, like, the way in which you were, like, when you think about it in hindsight, do you see, like, did you have a kind of faith that made the civil rights and philosophical things like make sense, or did you come to Christianity as an adult? Like, what's a little bit more about your spiritual journey?
Yeah, there's no question. Like for me and my path, growing up in the church made an indelible mark on me. Like it captured me in a way that even as I tried to like shake loose, and at times in my life, I think for good reason, that I was resisting the theology I had been taught. I was hurt by the experiences in my life, and I had a hard time squaring them with my faith. And so I think there were moments where I took a breath, and it was needed. But I started in the church. My mother was 17 when I was born. She graduated high school 9 months pregnant, had me that summer. She enrolled in college. She was a cheerleader. My biological father was also an athlete at that school, but they didn't stay together for very long. And she met my stepfather, who was also an athlete. This will be one of the themes that's probably consistent in my life. Um, and they got married like right out of school. So I was 4 years old. I had this new stepdad. He's like 22. She's 22. He goes to medical school in the middle of Missouri at the University of Missouri. So we're this young family. But my biological father's family was heavily Catholic. My grandmother was from Central America. Her husband was Irish Catholic. And I was transitioned into this world where we were going to First Baptist Church on Monday. So I'd see Catholic Church some weeks, and I'd mostly see the Baptist Church and Southern Baptist Church. And if you're old enough, then you've lived through what seems to me to be like a really interesting transition between what the church was for me as a child growing up in the 80s and how it seems to operate now and how it intersects with culture and politics now. When I was young, being like a conservative Christian, I never heard that term. I was definitely growing up in conservative Christian circles. Like that was what I was doing, and all that came along with that. Church camp in the summer, church on Wednesday nights, two services on Sunday. Like I didn't love all of that, to be honest. At times it was just a bit much for me, but there was something at work in the kind of macro message that I was getting that, I don't know, like formed this relationship between me and creator and made me curious. And I learned things about the scripture that didn't seem to make sense, but as I got older and I found the freedom to question them and interrogate them, they did start to make more sense. And so, I went through this space like, I mean, doesn't everybody go through the space in their late teens, early 20s, where I wanted to listen to rock music. Like I wanted to listen to rap. I was 18 in 1990. So I grew up through the early days of NWA and, early rappers, Grandmaster Flash, starting it all like the early 80s, this East Coast movement that then found its West Coast vibe. And like, I wanted to be a part of that and nobody was going to talk me out of that. But the church made that difficult for me, or at least that was my feeling. So I had these moments, as a young person where I didn't want to be a part of it, but I probably also knew like there's something at work here that I'm going to figure out, or that is, that's just going to start to make more sense. And even in those moments where I wasn't thinking about it, I think there were things that were happening. And over time, you know, you're not 18 anymore. And 18 is great, but I wouldn't want to be 18 for eternity. And so I took those lessons and I had good people around me and I learned some hard lessons and grew from that. And I think over time, God works in mysterious ways, man. I end up here.
I wouldn't want to be 18 forever, and Blair, I'll toss to you to ask the next question. But I wouldn't mind having 18-year-old. I wouldn't mind having 18-year-old knees. I will say that. That's what I have learned. Like I'm like, if my knees could feel like they felt when I was 18, I'm telling you,
True,
from athletic perspective,
true.
that would be nice. That would be nice. But Blair.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about politics on this podcast because the church is always political because the church is a gathering of people. And so if your church isn't paying attention to how people gather and what that means for our society as a whole, I think you should probably ask some questions about your church. But we're not lawyers. You are. So we talk a lot about the law and like politics, but we don't actually have that experience. And so I'm curious, just like, what does it feel like to be a lawyer right now? Like, I saw a tweet recently that, like doctors don't trust RFK and the military generals don't trust Pete Hegseth and lawyers don't trust Pam Bondi. And like, I know what it feels like to try to be a pastor right now, where I'm like examining all of this like misuse of scripture and try to walk with people through this cognitive dissonance. But like, what does it feel like to be a lawyer right now?
I think if you're just living right now and you're paying attention to your experience, you probably have a sense of what it means. Because being a lawyer right now puts you in a space where you hear these things nationally that are happening. And sometimes they do show up in your doorstep, but the day-to-day work of the courts, the day-to-day work of law, I was in court this morning in Lawrence County, Missouri, which is the county where I was raised in a town of about 6,000 people. Like you got lawyers showing up there from all the surrounding counties, and they're doing work for people in conflict who have to have people help them sort out that conflict. And so, yeah, Pam Bondi, I mean, what a conversation you could have about, the Department of Justice right now. But for the most part, like, as much damage as the Department of Justice can do and does do, there are thousands of people out here day to day doing good work, trying to do good work, who, for the most part, aren't caught up in all this stuff, may not even know that much about it. And they're trying to serve clients, they're trying to raise families, they're trying to live with each other, they're trying to follow their own rules of ethics. And there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of background chatter. And I would never say that it doesn't matter because I think it matters a whole lot. But like, it just reminds you that even in war torn areas of the world, like this is kind of what it's like. Not exactly, but it shows you that like even as things get highly disrupted and dangerous and scary, people still got to get up and find a way to like make a good life. And that's what they do.
No, I do think that there is a certain segment of society that is so politically engaged, right? And so engaged with what's happening in the world. And it feels like we can feel like, because I'm one of those people, that every decision that I'm making is paramount because I live in I won't say an echo chamber, but I've created a space for myself where I consume a lot of political, religious like content. Like that's part of my job. It's part of the podcast. It's part of my job as a pastor. And you could begin to think that that's all real, right? And then I go back home and visit my family, and they don't know a lot about what's happening because they're just focused on the day to day grind of surviving. And so even people in my congregation in Westwood, like they're still trying to focus on the things of raising kids and going to work and so recognizing that we have as people, I would say, of a certain kind of privilege, we need to, prevent as much disruption of systems we know to be just that we need to uphold as possible, while also recognize the common humanity that people have to. How can we help people live a flourishing life? Like so much of that is at the crux of what we're trying to do. In the midst of all the other BS, we're trying to help people live a flourishing life.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this thing, which is what I think scripture does. I mean, now that I've said what I've said, I'm going to talk out the other side of my mouth and I'm going to hold these things in tension, right? Because the
It's
truth is that
okay.
everything you said does matter. And just as I said, like, we're all here trying to no, the things that are happening on the macro level. And I think the things that are happening in my own state at the level of my Supreme Court, at the level of the governorship, at the level of the legislature, these things are fundamentally reshaping like the skeleton of democracy in my state and nationally. So yeah, everybody's here like doing their thing and lots of people are focused on, the micro work. the macro work matters. And we're seeing things, just within the last year, we voted in 2024 as a state, just within the last election, we've had statewide votes that dealt with issues of, you're talking about things like abortion, and reproductive health and rights of women, that are attempted to be overturned by our legislature and our governor. These are votes of the people, man. And so what is weird about Missouri is if you give us something to vote on, if you just give us the issue, hard to predict how it's going to come down. But like Medicaid for all, we've expanded that. Reproductive rights, we've voted to expand that. So we vote in this particular way, but then you put an R or a D to it, and we fall under this strange hypnosis, which I think is mostly just fear. And we vote the other way. Then we vote in people who take away the vote that we were given, as a larger community. It's very disorienting, but it's very real. And I live on a street. Well, I work on a street that's in mostly north central. They call it Midtown. It's north side of Springfield, which is probably the more economically distressed area of our city. And we've got shops. We've got a store 3 doors down from where I live, where ICE went in and removed the entire kitchen, took them out of Cuban Americans who were on path to citizenship. And we walked down the street one day, and there's a note on the door of a place that is, widely embraced in my community, that said, look, we're closing our doors. And here's why. They've taken all our people. And so, yeah, I was in Lawrence County this morning, and yeah, we were like doing work, and yeah, people are focused on the work that needs to be done. But also, yeah, the powers that are beyond us are having a really direct effect on the lives of the people that we live with and who we work next door to. And that is, for me, really disorienting. As many problems as I thought we had, I think we had these problems. I thought we were sick. I just didn't think we were like this sick. And maybe I did. I don't know. In some ways, I'm like, I'm just glad there's a level of honesty here that kind of always knew was out there. And now I know what y'all think. You weren't in it for DEI. You didn't think having diverse workplaces was a good idea. You didn't want any of this. You were just doing it because there was so much social pressure, and now somebody has relieved you of the burden, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's actually what I think and what I want. And so I don't know, in some ways it's like the gift that nobody would have asked for if we can survive it.
No, I completely agree. I do think it has been a apocalyptic in that way, where apocalypse revealing something about people that,
Uncovering.
yeah,
Yeah.
uncovering. Like we know, like it's nice. It is it we now we know who you are, right? Now we know who you are despite what you say, because we look at what you do and not what you say. And I think that, like, I think you're right that we live in this tension, and I think that is like what parables invite us to consider, as you just said, like the ways in which this is the way things matter tangibly on the ground, and also these macro structures and the way they matter in shaping our lives and influencing things. Which kind of brings me to the case that you won in the Supreme Court with respect to homelessness before we move to your journey to seminary, because I do think one of the things that people are struggling with right now is like, how do we fight back? Like having hope, right? Like actually saying, like, how can we resist these systems that we know are wrong? Like we can, and actually feeling like there are people who are challenging these systems and actually succeeding. So maybe if you could just maybe tell us a little bit about that case and like kind of what you overturned and how you feel like this is obviously a good decision that benefits the community.
Well, this is why I stayed in law. And people ask me all the time, like, when are you gonna lead a church, and where are you leading a church? I'm like, we can do church together every day. Like we can, I see you every day.
Mm,
You
mm.
don't have to wait till Sunday. Stop waiting, and figure out where God's calling you to be, and just go. And for me, it was to keep doing, to being pastoral, but out of my law office. I do a fair amount of work for an organization here in Missouri that's called the Gathering Tree. And the Gathering Tree is a housing collective, basically. that creates these tiny home communities for the chronically unsheltered and then provides them kind of ultra affordable housing. And in 2023, our legislature in Missouri passed this House bill. That's what HB 1606 is. It's a House bill, gets passed in the Senate, gets voted on, gets signed into law. This House bill was completely going to reframe how both state money and federal money that's given to the state, which the state then hands out, we call that federal pass-through money, how it was going to be given to organizations that work with the homeless here in the state of Missouri. Who was going to qualify for it, how you qualified for it, what you had to do to qualify for it. And it resembles this move that the new administration has talked about in recent months, which is like, if you're going to get help, you got to first get off drugs, you got to first find a job. And these organizations are like housing first organizations. You got to have shelter first. We'll work on the addiction, we'll work on the trauma, but we got to have people who can survive temperatures. It was 24 degrees when I woke up today, and then started snowing. So we got to house people. Well, this was going to reframe all of that. And it was going to give the attorney general authority over certain cities. I think that's a conflict with the city of St. Louis and Jefferson City in my state, because the city of St. Louis is probably the most liberal area in our state. So that was a political move. It was going to criminalize homelessness and increase penalties, for homelessness. And this organization that I work with, they've got moxie, man. These folks they will step into it. They will run to the fire. And they said, we've got to challenge this. And there weren't a whole lot of people coming forward to be like, yeah, we'll take this constitutional battle on. And so we did. And it's not the first time we've been in court fighting for the rights of, unsheltered people. And we took it on, and we had to use an argument that the legislature had acted improperly in passing this by basically including a number of issues in a single bill, which you're not supposed to do in Missouri. And the reason you're not supposed to do it is because you can put a bunch of issues in a bill, give it to legislators, and they don't know, they're not able to vet all of these issues and figure out exactly what they're voting on. It's exactly what happened here. It worked exactly like it's not supposed to work. And on the flip side of that, we said you can't do this way. It's a constitutional argument. And everybody thought, well, this is great. You're overturning a very bad law, but you have to know the law in order to make the law, work. You have to know the rules of the game. And we couldn't just challenge this law by saying, like, you're going to hurt people. And you may not believe this, but that's not actually a good legal challenge. That's not a constitutional challenge. The legislature can hurt people, and often does hurt people in the decisions that it makes. But we found a constitutional anchor, and we lost at the circuit court, which is a lower court, and we appealed it directly to the Missouri Supreme Court. And I thought we were in pretty good shape when one of our justices turned to the lawyer for the attorney general's office, and he said, "Hey, are you talking about all this other stuff? Because you are on really bad footing when it comes to the issues that they've raised in this case." Well, I'm glad he said that to him and not me. I think we're headed in the right direction here. So they gave us a unanimous verdict by the end of the year, threw the whole thing out. And of course, there was all this talk speak about how they were going to just go back and pass the same law again. But this is why the courts matter. This is why systems matter, because it's not just that easy. They had lost the momentum. They had lost their coalitions. And so when we broke up that system that was going to disenfranchise, the homeless here in Missouri, they couldn't regroup. And we've prevented them from regrouping. I mean, they might still do it, but that's how, systems have this inertia to them. And as you guys know, like if you can stop things, or if you can start things systematically, where we live, that's got great power. And so we kept it from moving forward. and it reverted to the old system. The old system's got plenty of problems. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the way we do it is not perfect in Missouri, but we were really worried. Homeless organizations were almost uniformly very concerned about what this was going to do to our ability to take care of people.
Theologically, like my little theology brain's going off because I am just thinking about our baptismal vows. So, do you vow to combat injustice, evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? And that's exactly what you're doing. We talk a lot about systemic sin on this podcast and how like small choices to not bother to love, that's how we often define sin, is the failure to bother to love. So all these small choices to fail to bother to love build up into these big systems of oppression, and you ran a spear right through the center of this big system of oppression. And that is just so powerful. And I also loved hearing you talk about how like we're doing church right now, because to me, like that's what church is like you're doing church when you get together with a coalition of people who care deeply about their neighbors, about their unhoused neighbors, and say, we're going to devote our time to loving them in a way that breaks down this system that's trying to do them harm. And to me, that is church. And so thank you for doing that. Like that's what the power of the ministry of the laity is like to be a person who is fighting evil, oppression, and injustice in whatever form it presents itself is not something priests and clergy do. We do that and we lead communities in doing that. But on the daily, those micro, right? Even this connection between the micro and the macro, like the way that we change systems is in these little micro moments of filing that brief, of issuing that petition, of having that press conference, of sitting with that person, of holding that woman's hand, of offering that dollar. Like the micro things that we do in love for one another also have the power to build up into systems of love that combat systems of evil.
Yeah, absolutely. If the priesthood of all believers is going to mean anything, then let it mean that, you know?
No, exactly, and I could Blair, I could see, like, your evangelist brain, like, so Blair's specialization is evangelism, and I was like, "Oh, this," I'm like, "You are speaking her language," because I do think that matters, and I've come to realize how important it is for our church community, at Westwood and at the Loft to invest in and to see this as ministry. Like, very early on, Blair pointed out that this podcast was evangelism, and that it is like church for some people in a way that I had not anticipated. And I know
Yeah.
the reason it's sustainable is because we're at a church that actually is it's a wealthy church relative speaking to other churches. I want to shout out to Margaret Zimmer, who painted a Christmas ornament that we got, that has our well, I won't say my beautiful face, the beautiful faces of my colleagues on it. My co-hosts, and Margaret is messaging me, and Instagram is just like how much of an impact this podcast has had for her and for her faith development, and feeling like this is, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is church for people in a way that I didn't anticipate. And so I guess this leads me to the question I wanted to ask you, Ben, is like, what led you to want to go to seminary? Like, clearly you're already doing good work, you're doing civil rights work, you're doing what I would call ministry in any way, shape, or form, and yet something happens, I suspect, like, you felt, I mean, we've all had the call. Like, actually, Blair, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about our specific call stories on the podcast, but they are like, when you decide to take the commitment to go to get an MDiv, at least in our denomination, the United Methodist Church, I guess because you feel a particular kind of calling. So I'm curious, Ben, if you could share a little bit about like what was your kind of like call story to go to seminary, and what led you to Duke?
I think I've had like this low grade fever, for the call since I was like young.
I 100%. I'm like, oh my, like it. And Blair, again, I don't know if this was, but like I knew, I was like, but I was like, I don't want to do this, man. Like, like I was resisting what I felt. But I think low grade fever is a great way to describe it. It's like this, like I wasn't allowing my heart to
Do you
completely
mean
get
like the
strangely
fire of the
warm.
Holy Spirit in your body? Is that what you're describing?
Maybe.
I think the Spirit knows what it's doing because I didn't pursue it for a host of reasons that I could identify at the time. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I looked at going into seminary straight out of law school. Thought I'm just going to go into seminary. Like this is where I think I go next, and then I'll figure out how to combine these two. But I got a job. I came back here, and I wanted to be a lawyer. Like I wanted to fight, as lawyers fight, and I wanted to learn how to do this. And as you start the practice, you realize you don't really know anything. You don't really know how to do this. And there is a how to. There's a how to filing cases and talking to juries and preparing a case for trial and even selecting cases. And so I wanted to do that. But I did have this feeling, and even as a young lawyer, like my church pastors would come to me and be like, hey, what if you were our youth minister? I'm like, I'm a lawyer. I don't have time to be your youth minister. No, but listen to me. What if we just, I'm like, no, 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 I'll teach class. I'll be an active lady, but like, it's not really for me. And I say those are the reasons I could identify. Like, I also wanted to make some money. I mean, if I'm just straight up being honest, I wanted to be able to take care of myself. I wanted to be able to take care of my family. So I had things I wanted to do. I also think that what God knows at that time was I wasn't ready for it. Like, as much as everybody was like, you should be a minute, I'd go to your church. You guys I know you hear this stuff from people like as you're preparing to go into ministry. They're like, you have this gift or you're so good at this. And it's very enticing. And I know that they mean well, but I had fallen into this trap listening, I think, to my parents who also meant well, trying to tell me how I was supposed to live my life in ways that aligned with them, but not so much with me. And I just didn't do it. But I think I'm telling you, God knows I was not ready for it. I wouldn't have been good at it. I actually think I would have been dangerous. Which for a host of reasons. I was in a marriage that I wasn't happy in, and I knew that. And as much as I wanted to, again, a whole host of reasons, stay in it, and as much as I wanted to, be this person that everybody thought I wasn't happy in this space. And I think that one of the things that was a little distressing to me about seminary was that we didn't give people a space enough to be like honest about why they're there and what they bring into that space, and whose voices they can hear and how to distinguish those because we all have them. And I needed time to sort out who I was. And that's complicated. It's complicated and hard for young people, especially when you're not encouraged to do it. Especially when you're told not to do it. Don't look too deep. Just do what you're told. Move in this direction. This is the direction you want to go. And so years later, I found myself kind of just disinterested in the law. I'd been doing it for 20 years. I was growing tired of it. There was a lot of pressure on me, in my firm, and I had an opening to do some pastoral work at this church I started attending through a friend of mine, and I just got so curious, and I got to this point where they wanted me to be a pastor. I came on as an associate pastor. They wanted all these things from me, and they didn't even necessarily want me to go to seminary, if I'm being honest. It's kind of a church that prided itself on not being a church kind of church, if you can follow that.
I got you.
But
I know. Yeah.
thank you, Claire.
I culturally understand exactly what you're saying.
Thank you. But this is why philosophy was such a good fit for me. I wanted to know. I desperately wanted to know. And I thought, I can't die and not know more about what I'm living for. I just can't do it. I know myself. I'll end up taking last breaths, and it will be my biggest regret that I didn't ask my questions, that I didn't probe deeper, that I didn't stand up in class and yell out these questions and argue with my peers. And I have no problem being wrong, but I really need you to help show me why I'm wrong. And I need you to help, give me more information. It was really a quest for information as much as anything. And I did it. And then I think I came out on the other end, and I'm like thinking to myself, well, learning more is extremely valuable. Learning more is extremely valuable. Why you believe what you believe and what you're pinning these beliefs to, where they come from, the context, how you use it. Very information. I'm big on information, big on knowledge, but it's the feeling, it's the emotional aspect, it's this spirit that I really resist a lot because I trust my brain more than I trust anything that I can't see or document or feel or test. I came out of it thinking, I'm going to learn all the ways to tell people what they need to believe, and then they're gonna listen to me. This is very lawyerly. Um,
Oh man, that's funny.
If only that was how it worked.
I mean, really, the law is a great teacher in this respect. That's not why juries vote the way they vote. It's not why people believe what they believe. It's just not. I had a partner, a mentor, who used to tell me, a man convinced against his will is of the opinion still. I came out just struggling with this realization that there is no amount of information. It's helpful to me. It's great for me. But now I got to go be with people, and I got to be somebody who's willing to understand their stories. I got to be a listener. I got to show them warmth when they show me cold. I got to show justice when they show me oppression. I got to be willing to follow this light, and I got to be good with it in myself and not working for the affirmation and the praise and the response of all these people who will show up in church and tell me what a great sermon I gave. I got to detach from this and just be willing to stand next to God through all of this. And, I think I'm still learning how to do that.
And I know you shared in our pre-show conversation that you've been serving as a lay pulpit supply. So in the Methodist Church, we have layers sort of ways you can serve in the church. And so you can serve as a lay person who's qualified to speak and preach, but isn't necessarily appointed to a church. But you can be temporarily appointed to like care for a church when they don't have a pastor appointed. And then to be a pastor who's appointed, there's like these levels of examination you have to go through. And so I know you mentioned a little bit that like you're maybe considering going through the examination to be appointed as a pastor, to be a clergy person, but you've been serving as a lay pastoral presence. So like those aren't oxymorons, I promise. Like you're doing the pastoral work without the role and the examination and the authority of being a clergy person, right? And the idea is that you do it temporarily and then you go back to your lay work, which is, we have already discussed, also ministry. You're doing really
Right.
good ministry in your lay work. So you said you've been doing that for the last year. Can you just tell us more? Like, what has it been like to balance those two things, to be this pastoral theological leader while also being a full-time lawyer daily and trying to like be with people in that ministry work and be with people in your legal work? And just how have you been
While
balancing that? What does it feel like?
while also doing it in a place where I suspect you're challenging their theological assumptions, right? Like you
And
are
maybe
like
they're political. Yeah.
yeah. So how are you you? That's basically what we're asking.
I'll do it in 90 seconds. I mostly show up and just hope that nobody I've sued is in my congregation that week. I maybe I should take a roll call. Um, no, I think it's a great fit for me, really. If I'm being honest, I have things that I think God puts on my heart, or you know, things to talk about for that week. There's no shortage of messages to give. I'm not a big fan of the hierarchy in the church or how it plays out. I'm not a big fan of how, in my experience, most preachers preach and don't teach. So for me, it's probably good because I don't have enough material to show up every week and give a message that I think is A plus. Like I just don't, and also I don't want to do it. If I'm just being honest, like I don't want to have to show up every Sunday in the way that congregations look to pastors, like tell me, give me something this week. I got it. I'm like, man, you have everything you need, you know. In some ways, I feel like we just got lazy, and we gave up so much authority to pastors that I was going to church every week wanting them to give me the answer. And they don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. And so for me, it's a good fit because I'm not tempted to like grab the mic out of God's hand and be like, no, I got this. I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it, which would be my temptation. And instead, I get like, 2, 3 weeks at a time. I told you my last one went a little bit longer, but it helps me like step in and be in this space that is very holy to me, and it's such a privilege to be able to stand in front of a congregation. So it's a good reminder to me of the responsibility that comes with these baptismal vows that all of us take. It's really not just my vow, it's everybody's vow, but standing up in front of the church and leading it reminds you kind of hauntingly how serious this should be taken and what you're committing to. So if I'm being honest, like I think I probably get as much or more out of it than the people I get the chance to lead, because it's just such a good moment and opportunity to refocus and reconnect with who you are and whose you are. So it works out really well for me. And I've spent enough time, in front of the church over the past 7, 8 years that it's not awkward for me. I know the general sense of what I'm doing. But I think more people like actually need to do that, to see themselves as someone who's not leading the church from an authoritarian position, but leading the church as someone who's called, just as we're all called, to like put ourselves out there and mean what we say and say what we mean. So for all those reasons, it's been a huge blessing to me, and I wish more people had the chance to do it.
Yeah, I think that, the challenge that I think we are in is we're in an era where you have some people who are anti-intellectual, right? Who sometimes don't want to actually do the work of actually learning about like how to read the Bible, how to study scripture, how to understanding theology, understand theological history, all these other things that actually can make you a more informed leader, right? Because as you said, I remember, like one of the things that for me in my call story, that was really gave me hesitation that I still think about is the fact my grandfather would talk about like the important responsibility, of this job. Those kinds of things are important for him because he's proud that I'm doing, in his words, the Lord's work. And he talks about like if you're in front of those people saying something, you're responsible for their souls. Like you're doing soul work. And that for me made it, on one hand, it made me nervous, like to even to do it because I was like, man, this is a big deal. But it reminds me of the sacramental relationship that I feel like I have with my congregation and with people in that particular position. Blair, I'm wondering if you want to say a little bit about even just your own like position in this and how you felt called to do this, and then we can kind of wrap up. And I can see this is going to be one of perhaps a few times, Ben, we'll have you on because I'm already thinking like whenever we get like another legal, because I'm like I don't understand. Like I was like, now you're gonna be like our legal correspondent. I'm like, hey, we're bringing in our legal correspondent, and we have to keep him our retainer because I'm like, this is actually gonna be helpful. But Blair, yeah, I'm curious if you say a little bit about that because I know yours was a bit of a journey as well.
Yeah, there are many days where I question if I still belong in the priesthood of the clergy not because of my own call and the way I understand my relationship to God and my relationship to the church, because of how lay people see me as a clergy person. And the way in which that often means they abdicate their own process of thinking and their own process of testimony and their own process of witness and their own process of ministry. And that when I walk in the room, there's like a release of their responsibility. And I know that my call is the opposite. Is like my job is to help you understand your responsibility, to help you feel empowered and to have the knowledge that you need to step out into the world, to be the church all the time, not just on Sunday. That's my job as a pastor. But we professionalized ministry a long time ago. Like in the medieval era, right? Where we were like, we pay priests to absolve our sins so we don't have to be responsible for it. We pay priests to read the scripture so that we don't have to do it. We pay, right? And I struggle with that a lot. And so I actually often tell young people, I'm like, go do another thing, go make money, because the church can't run without money. Like, somebody has to pay the bills. And I'm not, my theological training, I pipelined straight from undergrad right into seminary. And I applied for 2 or 3 things. I applied for the Sojourners like internship in DC, which would have been like faith-based community organizing. I applied for a White House internship with the plan to go to law school. And then I applied to seminary. And the only one that worked was seminary. And so here I am, however many years later, as a pastor, because that's the path that God opened for me. But we all have ministry work to do. And I need as a pastor who cares about evangelism, which is like the public proclamation of God's good news in the world, I need lay people who are excited to be part of the work of the church, who are excited to be part of the work that God is doing in the world, who understand themselves not as consumers of God's work, but as producers of the kingdom that we all can inhabit together. And so I love the way in which you have found this sort of in and out, Ben, of like getting to stand in the pulpit and then returning to your office in another building, in another space, and the fluidity in which you are now finding the ability to move between those spaces. I think that's beautiful. And I think my desire is that, yes, I want to train clergy, but I also want to train lay people, and I want lay people to feel the call of pursuing their baptismal vows as you described. Thanks for proving that it's possible. And like, I wish everybody could get a 3-year MDiv, master's degree, right? Like, there's a lot of problems, like access and money and time and all those things. But I'm just grateful that you have done the work you've done and continue to do the work you do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's it's a blessing. It's one of many. I've been really lucky. So I'm thankful to sit here, and I wish you both all the best in all these pursuits that you've described. It's meaningful, even though we're like half a country away from each other. My son's out there with you. I have friends out there. And even if I didn't, I think that it's important to know that we're watching. I'm watching you just as you're watching me, and we're watching over each other. And so what you do out there, I know it's not in my neighborhood, but in some ways it is, and it really matters. And I'm beyond thankful that you all do the work that you do and that you are who you are. So thank you for that, and thanks for having me today.
No, thanks, Ben. We're so honored to have you as the first of. I'm gonna name it and say it's gonna happen. That we'll have you back again, especially because I know. I mean, with this like legal apparatus we got in this country, there is any number of times when we'd be like, "Hey, can you explain this to me in the best way possible?" Because we are in the world that is bizarre world. But
It's
yeah.
almost every day. Almost every, in fact, maybe it is every day. Maybe it's multiple times a day. We're, yeah, you need help from a lawyer, it seems like, figuring out what is going on and what's it mean.
Exactly. Well, we want to thank you all for listening to the Progressive Christians podcast. The Progressive Christian podcast is a ministry of the Loft, a registered community of Westwood United Methodist Church. If you would like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at the Progressive Christians. Our show is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ. We want to please invite you to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're using. If it's YouTube, please like a video, please subscribe. That does help us, help other people find us, and when they use that search and that algorithmic stuff. And if you're on iTunes or Spotify or however you're connecting, please subscribe. And if you think you know someone who would like the show, send it to them. We are really trying to be a voice in the wilderness, if you will, to resist the rise of this Christo fascism that we see so much in our country. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
Amen.